I'm too big for you. The black mail-order bride said, her voice trembling as she stepped off the train. Every eye in town fixed on her. The dusty street went silent, the church bell tolled, and whispers cut like knives. But the virgin Amish man stood tall, hat in hand, and said just one thing: "You're perfect." The crowd laughed, but what came next was no laughing matter. Because this marriage was supposed to be a quiet beginning, until the railroad set its sights on their land. Deputies with torches, forged papers, a cabin in flames. She carried a secret no one expected, an old deed, a promise written in fire and blood that could save their future or destroy it. As thunder rolled over the valley, faith and love stood against greed and hate. But when the world tells you you're too much, too different, too weak to fight back, can love and courage truly be enough to win? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Train's whistle pierced the winter air as Sophia Johnson stepped onto the wooden platform. Her boots crunched in the fresh snow, and her breath came out in white puffs against the Colorado cold. The carpet bag felt heavy in her grip, but not as heavy as the stairs that followed her every move. "Would you look at that?" a woman whispered, not bothering to lower her voice. "She's as big as a house." Sophia straightened her spine, clutching her bag tighter. She'd heard worse in Georgia, but here in this small town between Denver and Leadville, the words still stung. The cold wind whipped at her skirts as she scanned the platform, searching for the man she'd agreed to marry through letters exchanged over 6 months. That's when she saw him, John Lapp, standing apart from the crowd, his black hat held respectfully in his hands. He was tall, yes, but thin as a rail, his plain dark coat hanging loose on his frame. His face was kind, though, with gentle eyes that met hers without flinching. Before she could stop herself, Sophia blurted out, "I'm too big for you." Her cheeks burned as soon as the words left her mouth. But there it was, the truth she'd been dreading to face since she'd stepped off the train. John's face flushed pink, but his voice was steady, if quiet. "You're perfect," he said, taking a step toward her. A few townsfolk snickered, and Sophia heard someone mutter something about strange matches, but John didn't seem to hear them. He moved forward with purpose, closing the distance between them. "Welcome, Miss Johnson," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm mighty pleased you've come to be my bride." The whispers didn't stop, but something in Sophia's chest loosened at his words. He was claiming her, right here in front of everyone, with no shame or hesitation. John reached for her carpet bag. "Let me take that for you," he said softly. His hands were work-roughened but gentle as he lifted the bag from her grip. "The wagon's just over here." He led her to a simple wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. The wood was worn but well-maintained, and there was fresh hay in the back to help cushion the ride. John helped her up onto the seat, his touch careful but sure, then climbed up beside her. The sun was already sinking toward the mountains as they set out, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Neither of them spoke much as the wagon creaked along the rutted road. Sophia found herself stealing glances at John's profile, the straight nose, the neatly trimmed beard, the way his hands held the reins with quiet confidence. The silence between them wasn't exactly comfortable, but it wasn't uncomfortable either. It was the silence of 2 people who had shared their hearts in letters, but were now learning how to exist in the same space. As they crested a small hill, John's homestead came into view. A simple cabin stood sturdy against the darkening sky, smoke curling from its chimney. A barn stood off to one side, and Sophia could make out the shapes of a chicken coop and what looked like the beginnings of a garden plot, though it was hard to tell under the snow. "There's a lantern burning," Sophia noted, spotting the warm glow in the cabin's window. "I lit it before I left," John explained, his voice soft. "Wanted you to have light to welcome you home." Something warm bloomed in Sophia's chest at the word home. She'd had a home once, back in Georgia with her father, but that was gone now. Could this place with this quiet man become a new one? John helped her down from the wagon and led her to the cabin door. Inside, the space was plain but tidy, with a pot of something that smelled like beef stew simmering on the wood stove. A quilted bed stood in one corner, a wooden table and chairs in another. Simple curtains hung at the windows, and a bookshelf held what looked like a Bible and a few other volumes. "I know it's not much," John said, setting her carpet bag down carefully. "But I hope you can be comfortable here." Sophia stood in the middle of the room, taking it all in. The cabin was smaller than the house she'd grown up in, but there was something about it, maybe the way the lamplight cast warm shadows on the walls, or how everything had its proper place, that made her feel oddly at peace, even as her heart fluttered with uncertainty. "Would you like some stew?" John asked, already moving toward the pot. "You must be hungry after your journey." Sophia woke to pale winter sunlight, streaming through the cabin's small windows and the familiar smell of corn mush cooking. She lay still for a moment, wrapped in the warmth of the quilts John had given her for the bed while he'd taken the floor near the stove at the table. John knelt with his head bowed, hands clasped in silent prayer. His plain black clothes seemed to absorb the morning light. Sophia watched him, touched by the peaceful reverence of the moment. When he finally raised his head, their eyes met. "Good morning," he said softly. "I hope the corn mush is agreeable to you." "Smells just like home," Sophia replied, rising and smoothing her skirts. She joined him at the table, where 2 bowls waited. They ate in shy silence, stealing glances at each other between spoonfuls. The mush was simple but good, reminding Sophia of mornings back in Georgia. After they finished, John cleared his throat. "We should fetch your trunk from the depot," he said. "And I'd like to show you something at the land office, if you're willing." The morning air was crisp as they climbed into the wagon. As they rode toward town, Sophia gathered her courage. "May I ask about your faith? Your ways are different from what I know." John's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "I was raised Amish in Pennsylvania. But there was trouble. Some folks there didn't take kindly to our ways. I came west seeking peace and land of my own." He paused. "A place where a man might live according to his conscience." Sophia nodded, understanding the weight of unspoken words. She knew about leaving home, about seeking something better. At the depot, several men loitered near the storage area. Their eyes followed Sophia as she walked with John to collect her trunk. "Ain't natural," one man muttered loud enough to be heard. A big colored woman like that, with a skinny plain folk. John's face reddened, but his voice was steady and strong. "That's my wife you're speaking of, sir. I'll thank you to show her proper respect." Sophia's heart jumped at his words. She hadn't expected him to defend her so boldly. The men shuffled away, muttering, while John and the depot master loaded her trunk into the wagon. "The land office next?" John asked, helping her back onto the wagon seat. When she nodded, he clucked to the horses. The land office was a small building with a weathered sign. Inside, a clerk sat behind a high desk, papers scattered before him. When John requested to see his homestead filing, the man's expression turned evasive. "Seems we've misplaced that particular file," he said, barely looking up. "Might take some time to locate it. Lots of papers to sort through, you understand. But I filed everything properly." John protested, his voice tight with worry. "The survey was done, all the forms signed. These things happen," the clerk said dismissively. "Check back next week. Maybe it'll turn up." Outside, John's hands shook as he helped Sophia into the wagon. "Something's not right," he muttered. Those papers were all in order. Sophia placed her hand gently on his arm. "Let's be patient," she said. "Sometimes things have a way of working themselves out if we don't push too hard." She'd learned that lesson well in Georgia. As they rode home, Sophia noticed how John's gaze kept returning to the snow-covered valley stretching below their trail. The late morning sun made the untouched snow sparkle like diamonds. "What do you see when you look out there?" she asked. A small smile touched John's lips. A future, he said quietly. Fields of wheat in summer. A proper barn. A garden for you, if you'd like one. Room for children to run and grow strong. Back at the cabin, Sophia set about making supper while John tended to the animals. She found dried beans and cornmeal in his stores, and soon had beans simmering with a ham bone while she mixed cornbread batter. Kitchen filled with warmth and good smells as the sun began to set. John came in from his chores, bringing a blast of cold air with him. He paused in the doorway, taking in the sight of Sophia at the stove, then smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. She couldn't help but smile back as she set their supper on the table. The lamplight cast a warm glow over everything, making the simple cabin feel almost cozy. As they bowed their heads for John's prayer, Sophia felt a flutter of hope, despite the trouble at the land office. Perhaps here, with this quiet man, she might find the home she'd been seeking. The days settled into a gentle rhythm at the homestead, like the steady fall of snow that dusted the Colorado Valley. Each morning brought new tasks that Sophia and John tackled together, their movements becoming more natural around each other as the hours passed. On a crisp morning, John stood in the yard eyeing a tall stack of logs that needed splitting. He gripped the axe handle, preparing to begin, when Sophia emerged from the cabin wrapped in a thick shawl. "Let me help," she said, reaching for the axe. John hesitated, but handed it over. To his amazement, Sophia positioned herself with practiced ease, raised the axe high, and brought it down with powerful precision. The log split clean through with a satisfying crack. "My papa taught me," she explained, setting up another log. "Said everyone on a farm needs to pull their weight." Her strong arm swung the axe again, and another log surrendered to her strength. John watched in admiration as she worked, her movements sure and efficient. When she paused to wipe her brow, a hearty laugh escaped her at his expression. "Never seen a woman split wood before?" His face flushed pink, but a small smile played at his lips. "Never seen anyone split wood quite like you do." They worked together through the morning, John stacking the split logs while Sophia wielded the axe. By midday, they had a respectable woodpile that would see them through the coming storms. The afternoon found them on the cabin's roof, patching holes before the heavy snows arrived. Sophia handed John tools and shingles as he worked, their hands brushing occasionally. Each time, a warm current passed between them, despite the cold air. "The goats need feeding," John said as they finished the roof repairs. In the small pen behind the cabin, their small herd of goats bleated a welcome. Sophia scattered hay while John checked their water, their movements falling into an easy partnership. The next day brought them to town for supplies. The general store's bell tinkled as they entered, but the cheerful sound couldn't mask the storekeeper's sour expression when he saw Sophia. "Need some cloth for curtains," John said, his quiet voice firm. "And more lamp oil." The storekeeper turned deliberately toward John, acting as if Sophia wasn't there. "Got some nice muslin just came in." "How many yards?" Sophia touched different bolts of fabric, but the storekeeper continued to ignore her presence, addressing all his comments and questions to John. Her fingers lingered on a pretty floral print, but her shoulders slowly curved inward, her earlier confidence dimming with each slight. The ride home was heavy with silence. Sophia stared at the wrapped bundle of fabric in her lap, her usual warmth gone quiet. John glanced at her several times, worry creasing his brow, but she kept her eyes down. That evening, as they sat down to their simple supper of beans and cornbread, John cleared his throat. His hands trembled slightly as he folded them on the table. I need to tell you something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophia looked up, wariness in her eyes. "When I see you, when I watch you work, or hear your laugh," he paused, gathering courage. "You're strong and beautiful. The way you split wood, tend the goats, the way you carry yourself, it's all beautiful to me." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "No man's ever," she swallowed hard. "No one's ever spoken to me like that. They see my size, my color. They don't see me. I see you," John said simply. After they cleared the supper dishes, Sophia settled in the chair by the hearth. The firelight cast dancing shadows on the walls as she began to sing softly, her rich voice filling the cabin with an old spiritual her grandmother had taught her. "Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water." John sat with his hands folded in his lap, wonder spreading across his face as her voice rose and fell like a prayer. Outside, snow fell thick and fast, but inside the cabin, warmth bloomed between them like a tender spring flower pushing through winter soil. The spiritual ended, its last notes hanging in the air like smoke. Through the window, they could see the snow building up, creating a white wall that separated their small cabin from the rest of the world. In that moment of enclosed intimacy, something shifted between them, a seed of understanding taking root in the quiet of their shared solitude. The winter descended on the Colorado Valley like a heavy quilt, transforming the landscape into an endless sea of white. Inside their snug cabin, Sophia stood at the window, her breath fogging the glass as she watched snowflakes dance in the gray morning light. Her mind wandered to Georgia, to the red clay soil and cotton fields stretching toward the horizon. The memory of warm sunshine on her face made the bitter cold seem even sharper. "Time for the morning milking," John called softly from the door, bundled in his thick coat. Sophia pulled her shawl tighter and followed him to the goat pen. "Here, like this," John demonstrated, his thin fingers working with practiced ease as he showed her how to milk their best nanny goat. Gentle but firm, his quiet patience reminded her of her father teaching her to plant corn, and the thought brought both warmth and an ache to her heart. They worked side by side mending fences later that morning, their breaths forming clouds in the frozen air. John's skilled hands guided wooden posts into the frozen ground while Sophia held them steady, the familiar work different here in the biting cold that numbed her fingers through her mittens. When Sunday arrived, they hitched the wagon for the trip to town. The little clapboard church stood proud against the white landscape, its bell ringing clear across the valley. Sophia's heart quickened as John helped her down from the wagon. She could feel eyes following them as they approached the church steps. Inside, the whispers rose like a swarm of insects. Women in their Sunday best turned to stare, their disapproving frowns barely hidden behind gloved hands. Sophia felt her shoulders tense, ready to turn back, when a gentle voice cut through the murmurs. "Welcome, dear. Come sit with me." Mrs. Tillman, the preacher's wife, beckoned from her pew. Though frail in body, her smile held enough warmth to melt the winter snow. She patted the space beside her, ignoring the shocked looks from nearby congregants. Sophia slipped into the pew, grateful for the kindness in the older woman's eyes. As the service began, the familiar hymns lifted her spirit. She sang softly at first, then with growing confidence, her rich voice joining the congregation in praise. After the final Amen, Mrs. Tillman touched Sophia's arm. "My dear, what a beautiful voice the Lord has blessed you with," she whispered. "You must join our choir. We practice on Wednesday evenings." Her words, though simple, planted a seed of belonging in Sophia's heart. The wagon wheels crunched through fresh snow on their way home. Sophia sat quiet beside John, her thoughts as tangled as bare tree branches against the white sky. Finally she spoke, her voice barely louder than the creaking wheels. "I fear I don't belong here. John, the way they look at us." She twisted her hands in her lap. "Maybe we were wrong to think this could work." John's hands tightened on the reins. "No," he said firmly, his usual hesitant manner falling away. "This is God's will, Sophia. I feel it in my bones, sure as spring follows winter." He turned to meet her eyes. "You belong here. With me." Back at the cabin, Sophia kneaded bread dough while John stoked the fire. The familiar task soothed her, and soon the warm smell of baking bread filled their home. They shared the fresh loaf by lamplight, butter melting into the warm slices. John told a shy joke about a stubborn goat, surprising a laugh from Sophia. Soon they were both chuckling, their joy echoing off the cabin walls louder than the winter wind that whistled outside. In that moment, the stares and whispers from town seemed far away. Later, as John banked the fire for the night, Sophia prepared for bed. She reached into her carpet bag, fingers finding the folded paper she kept wrapped in a clean handkerchief. The yellowed document, her father's freedman's bureau deed, crackled softly as she touched it through the fabric. She hadn't shown it to John yet, this proof of her family's determination, their hard-won right to own land. It was her secret hope, a reminder that belonging was something you could build with your own hands. Just as her father had done, she tucked the precious document away and climbed into bed, Mrs. Tillman's kind words echoing in her mind. Perhaps belonging wasn't just about a piece of paper or even a place. Perhaps it grew slowly, like bread rising in a warm kitchen, nurtured by small kindnesses and shared laughter in the dark of winter. The March wind swept through the valley, carrying the first whispers of spring. Snow retreated like a tide drawing back, leaving behind a patchwork of muddy fields and scattered patches of white in the shadowed places. The morning air held a fresh promise as Sophia and John stood at the edge of their field, studying the thawing earth. "Time to learn the plow," John said softly, adjusting the leather harness on their workhorse. Sophia nodded, though her stomach fluttered with nerves. She'd worked Georgia fields before, but never behind a plow. John positioned her hands on the wooden handles, his touch gentle but sure. "Like this," he murmured, standing close behind her. "Keep the blade steady." His fingers brushed against hers as he demonstrated the proper grip, and Sophia felt warmth rise in her cheeks despite the cool morning air. The first furrow wavered like a drunken snake. Sophia couldn't help but laugh at her clumsy attempt. "Lord have mercy, these rows are crooked as creek bends." John's quiet chuckle joined hers. "You should have seen my first try." He guided her hands again, showing her how to lean into the turn. "There now. Feel the rhythm?" They worked through the morning, the fresh-turned earth releasing its deep, living smell. Sophia found herself stealing glances at John, the way the sun caught his profile, how his usual awkwardness melted away when he worked the land. Their eyes met once, and they both looked away quickly, smiling by afternoon. Sophia's arms ached pleasantly from the work. While John finished the last rows, she headed to the cabin to prepare supper. The familiar motions of cooking soothed her as she mixed cornmeal for Johnny cakes and pulled out her precious store of saved pepper and herbs. Her mother's fried chicken recipe had always brought smiles in Georgia. She hoped it might work the same magic here. The aroma of crackling chicken and fresh cornbread filled the cabin. John came in from the fields, stopping in the doorway to breathe in deeply. "What's that smell?" "Southern cooking," Sophia answered, pleased at his obvious interest. "Sit yourself down." John washed up and settled at the table, watching with wide eyes as she set out the golden brown chicken and steaming Johnny cakes. He folded his hands, and for the first time since her arrival, began to pray aloud in her presence. "Dear Lord," he started, his voice trembling slightly, "we thank you for this food, for the spring planting, and—" he paused, then continued with quiet certainty, "for the wife you have given me." Sophia bowed her head quickly, but not before John caught sight of tears glinting in her eyes. His simple words wrapped around her heart like a warm blanket, chasing away old hurts and doubts. They had barely finished their first bites when heavy boots thumped on the porch. Without waiting for an invitation, 3 neighboring couples pushed through the door, their faces a mix of curiosity and poorly hidden disdain. "Thought we'd pay a neighborly call," announced Samuel Tucker, the nearest homesteader. His wife Sarah's lips pressed thin as she surveyed the cabin, her gaze lingering disapprovingly on Sophia. John stood, his stance protective though his voice remained gentle. "Welcome. We were just sitting down to supper. Smells mighty peculiar," muttered Tom Wilson, another neighbor, loud enough to be heard. Sophia straightened her shoulders and found her voice. "There's plenty to share, if you'd care to join us." She began setting out extra plates, her hands steady despite the tension filling the room. The men exchanged glances, their hunger warring with their prejudice. The scent of fried chicken proved too tempting to resist. Soon they sat awkwardly around the expanded table, though their wives remained standing, arms crossed. "This is..." Tom Wilson paused between bites of chicken, seemingly struggling with himself. "Different." Silence fell heavy as a winter blanket. The neighbors ate quickly, making no further comment. Sarah Tucker's face remained pinched with disapproval, while her husband couldn't quite hide his enjoyment of the meal. Under the table, John's hand found Sophia's, giving it a firm squeeze. The simple gesture spoke volumes of support, of choice, of partnership. Sophia squeezed back, drawing strength from his touch as their uninvited guests finished eating in tense silence. When the neighbors finally left, their departing words were curt. But Sophia noticed they had cleaned their plates completely, and Tom Wilson had cast one longing look at the remaining chicken before stepping out into the gathering dusk. John closed the door behind them and turned to Sophia. The lamplight caught the proud smile playing at the corners of his mouth. In that moment, she knew that whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together, the quiet Amish man and his strong-hearted wife, chosen and acknowledged before God and neighbor alike. Spring sunshine warmed the Colorado Valley as Sophia found her place in the small frontier community, one careful step at a time. The quilting circle at Mrs. Tillman's cottage became her weekly refuge. Her strong hands guided fabric through careful stitches while the preacher's wife shared stories of frontier life. "These quilts mean the world to our widows," Mrs. Tillman said one afternoon, her thin fingers smoothing a patch of blue calico. "Winter's harsh out here, especially alone." Sophia nodded, thinking of the cold nights she'd known. "Everyone needs a bit of warmth," she said softly, adding another neat stitch to the growing pattern. Outside the whitewashed church on Sundays, Sophia discovered another unexpected joy. The children, less burdened by their parents' prejudices, gathered around her on the grass as she brought Bible stories to life. "Tell us about David and Goliath again." Little Mary Wilson called out, her eyes bright with excitement. Even Tom Wilson's stern face softened slightly when he saw his daughter's delight. "Well now," Sophia began, her warm voice carrying across the churchyard, "there was this young shepherd boy who wasn't afraid to stand up to a giant." The children leaned in close, caught up in her storytelling, their laughter ringing clear as church bells. But dark clouds gathered on the horizon of their growing happiness. Sophia noticed the railroad men first, strangers in store-bought suits, carrying surveying equipment and maps. They lingered near John's fields, speaking in low voices and marking measurements in leather-bound notebooks. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Sophia couldn't hold her worry in any longer. She found John at the kitchen table, studying his own map of their homestead. "John," she said carefully, setting a cup of coffee beside him, "is our land truly secure?" His shoulders tensed at the question. In the lamplight, his face looked drawn with concern. "The missing filing troubles me still," he admitted quietly. "I've asked at the land office every week, but they give me nothing but excuses." Sophia pulled her chair closer to his, their shoulders touching as they bent over the map together. John's finger traced the boundaries of their land, pointing out where he dreamed of planting apple trees and pear orchards. "Here," he said, indicating a gentle slope, "the soil's just right for fruit trees. In 5 years' time, we could have a fine orchard." His voice grew animated as he described his vision. "The trees would blossom white in spring, and come fall, we'd have apples enough to share with the whole valley." Sophia closed her eyes, imagining the scene, trees heavy with fruit, children playing beneath branches laden with apples. The thought stirred something deep in her heart. "I want that," she whispered. "A home filled with little ones, watching the orchards grow alongside our family." She hesitated, then added even more softly, "I long for children." "John." The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls as John's face flushed red. His hand found hers on the table, fingers intertwining with gentle pressure. He started, then paused, gathering courage. "I will be a faithful husband to you, Sophia. Though I've never," his voice trailed off, embarrassment coloring his words. "I've never known a woman. But I promise to learn to be a good husband, and God willing, a good father." Sophia's heart swelled at his honest confession. Her own cheeks warmed as she squeezed his hand. "We'll learn together," she assured him softly. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken hopes and shy dreams. Finally, John cleared his throat and stood, carefully rolling up the map. "It's getting late," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We should rest," Sophia nodded, rising from her chair. They moved around each other in the familiar evening routine, banking the fire, securing the door, preparing for sleep. At the curtain that divided their sleeping spaces, they paused, both suddenly shy again. "Good night, John," Sophia whispered. "Good night, Sophia," he replied, his voice tender in the darkness. As she lay in her bed, Sophia's thoughts danced between hope and worry. The dream of their future together, the orchards, the children, the life they could build, filled her heart near to bursting. But the shadow of the railroad men's presence and the missing land filing cast a long shadow over their plans. She heard John shift in his bed on the other side of the curtain, and somehow the sound comforted her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. With that thought holding her like a warm blanket, she drifted off to sleep, dreaming of apple blossoms and children's laughter. Summer swept across the Colorado Valley like a painter's brush, daubing the hills with splashes of purple lupin and golden prairie sunflowers. The warm days stretched long and sweet, filled with the steady rhythm of homestead life that John and Sophia had built together. Their cabin hummed with new energy. Sophia's cooking filled it with aromas that made even passing neighbors pause and sniff the air appreciatively. The scent of fresh-baked bread and hearty stews drifted through the open windows, mingling with the mountain air. John had never eaten so well in his life, and his usual lean frame began to fill out with healthy vigor. From sunrise to sunset, John worked tirelessly. His skilled hands repaired loose boards, built new shelving, and tended to their growing garden. The land responded to their care, vegetables pushing up through the rich soil Sophia had helped till. Together, they created something neither had known before, a true home. Their presence in the community shifted too. Like ice melting in spring, Mrs. Wilson stopped by one morning, hesitant but determined, asking Sophia's advice about treating her youngest's fever. Sophia shared her grandmother's remedy of willow bark tea, and when the child recovered quickly, word spread. Soon other neighbors found reasons to visit, seeking John's carpentry skills or Sophia's medical knowledge. One Sunday morning in late June, the little church filled to bursting despite the summer heat. Sophia sat beside John in their usual pew, fan fluttering in her hand. When the congregation rose for hymns, her voice lifted clear and strong above the others, rich with emotion and faith. The first notes of Amazing Grace flowed from her like honey, filling every corner of the wooden church. Mrs. Tillman dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even Tom Wilson, who had never hidden his disapproval of their marriage, stood silent and still, his face softened by the music. For those precious moments, all the whispers and sidelong glances ceased. There was only the pure sound of Sophia's voice, carrying their prayers heavenward. Later that week, while John was out mending fences, Sophia put the finishing touches on a surprise she'd been working on for days. When he returned, dusty and tired, she proudly showed him the new curtains she'd sewn. The fabric was simple, just plain muslin with a bit of eyelet trim, but the care in every stitch showed her love for their home. "They're beautiful," John said softly, touching the delicate handiwork. His eyes met hers with wonder. "You make everything beautiful, Sophia." The next evening, after the day's work was done, they walked together through the tall prairie grass that surrounded their homestead. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, casting long shadows across the valley. Grasshoppers chirped in the warm air, and a gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of wildflowers. John stopped walking, turning to face Sophia. His usually quiet nature seemed to struggle with words he needed to say. "I want to tell you something," he began, his voice low but clear. "Your strength, it inspires me every day. The way you face everything, the stares, the whispers, the hard work with such grace and courage." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "You make me want to be a better man." Sophia's eyes glistened in the fading light. "For so long," she whispered, "I thought no one would ever truly love me. That I was too different, too big too." She shook her head, unable to finish. "You're perfect," John said, echoing his words from that first day at the train station. But now they carried the weight of months of shared life, of growing love and deepening trust. Their hands found each other, fingers intertwining naturally. The sun balanced on the edge of the mountains, washing their faces in golden light. John stepped closer, his free hand trembling slightly as he touched Sophia's cheek. Their eyes met, and in that moment, all their fears and doubts melted away. The kiss was gentle, brief, and sweet, like the brush of a butterfly's wing. When they drew apart, both were blushing, but their eyes shone with joy. They stood there in the tall grass, hands still clasped, as the sun slipped behind the mountains and the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky. It wasn't just a kiss between a man and woman. It was a seal on everything they'd built together, a promise of the future they would share. In that moment, their marriage transformed from an arrangement of convenience into something sacred and true. They had found in each other not just partners, but soulmates who understood and accepted each other completely. Late summer morning dawned bright and clear as Sophia hitched up her skirts and marched purposefully toward the cluster of women gathered outside the church. Her heart hammered, but her voice remained steady as she laid out her plan to help Widow Mason, whose barn had collapsed in last week's storm. "We can't let her lose her dairy cows when winter comes," Sophia declared, spreading her hand-drawn plans on a wooden table. "I reckon if we all pitch in, we can raise a new barn before the first frost." Mrs. Tillman nodded approvingly, while other women exchanged uncertain glances. But Sophia's confidence never wavered as she assigned tasks, from food preparation to childcare during the building. Her experience organizing harvest help back in Georgia showed in every detail she covered. Word spread quickly through the small town. By Sunday afternoon, even the most reluctant neighbors found themselves swept up in Sophia's enthusiasm. John watched from the church steps, his quiet pride evident in the way he stood straighter whenever someone praised his wife's initiative. The barn-raising day arrived with the crack of dawn. Women bustled around outdoor cooking fires while men positioned lumber and checked tools. Sophia moved among them all, her natural leadership drawing everyone into the rhythm of the work. She directed children carrying water, advised on the lunch preparations, and kept track of building progress with remarkable efficiency. At midday, when the frame of the barn stood halfway complete, everyone gathered for the meal. John stepped forward, removing his hat. The usual murmur of conversation died away as he spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Lord, we thank thee for this gathering of neighbors, for the bounty before us, and for teaching us that thy love knows no boundaries. Bless this food and the hands that prepared it. Amen." Sophia's eyes grew misty as several voices echoed amen. She watched in amazement as Mrs. Wilson, who had once crossed the street to avoid her, now asked for her cornbread recipe. Children who had previously stared now tugged at her skirts, begging for stories. Even Tom Wilson grudgingly admitted her organization had saved them hours of work. As evening approached and the barn stood nearly complete, Martha Jenkins approached with a cloth-wrapped bundle. "We've been saving these," she said, opening it to reveal carefully folded fabric scraps. "Thought you might like to make a proper quilt for your bed." Other women stepped forward, adding their own contributions of calico, gingham, and muslin pieces. Sophia's fingers trembled as she touched the fabrics, understanding the gesture's significance. These weren't just scraps. They were pieces of their families' lives, freely shared with her. John squeezed her shoulder gently, understanding her emotion. The next morning, Sophia headed to the depot to send a thank-you telegram to her sister about the barn-raising success. As she approached the building, voices drifted through the open window. She recognized the sharp tones of the railroad men who had been surveying nearby. "That Amish man's farm sits right where we need the line to run," one said. "Won't be hard to push him out by autumn. These religious folk usually cave quick when faced with progress. What about his woman?" Another asked. "She seems the type to put up a fight. Don't matter." Without proper papers, they got no leg to stand on. Sophia's heart clenched tight as a fist. The missing homestead filing, it hadn't been an accident after all. She forced herself to walk past the depot window normally, though her legs felt wooden. The joy of yesterday's triumph turned to ashes in her mouth. That evening, she managed to keep her smile in place as John described his plans for winter wheat planting. She nodded at all the right moments, but her thoughts kept circling back to the railroad men's words. After John retired to bed, she pulled out her carpet bag and withdrew the yellowed document hidden in its lining, her father's Freedmen's Bureau deed. Her fingers traced the official stamps and signatures that had given a former slave the right to own land. The deed represented everything her father had dreamed of: security, legitimacy, a future for his children. She had kept it secret, afraid to hope it might matter here in Colorado. But now, staring at the document in the lamplight, she wondered if it might be the key to saving their home. Sophia carefully returned the deed to its hiding place, her mind churning with possibilities and fears. Outside their cabin window, crickets chirped in the darkness, and a cool breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut hay from Widow Mason's new barn. The community had finally begun to accept them, to see them as neighbors rather than curiosities. The thought of losing it all made her chest ache. She glanced toward the bedroom where John slept peacefully, unaware of the threat to their dreams. For now she would keep this burden to herself. He deserved to savor the joy of their recent victories, the pride of standing tall among neighbors who had finally begun to respect them both. The late summer sun beat down mercilessly as hoofbeats thundered across the valley. Sophia stood at her wash basin, hands deep in soapy water, when she heard John's sharp intake of breath. Through the open door, she saw 5 riders approaching, 3 deputies and 2 railroad men she recognized from town. "Something's wrong," John murmured, stepping onto the porch. His shoulders tensed as the men dismounted, kicking up dust with their heavy boots. The lead deputy, a man named Tucker, strode forward waving a sheaf of papers. "This here's railroad property now," he announced, his voice carrying across the yard. "Got the papers right here showing the territory sold it months ago." "That's not possible," John protested, his quiet voice steady despite his trembling hands. "I filed homestead papers. This land is ours by right." Tucker's smile turned cruel. "Ain't no record of that filing anywhere, friend. Now clear out. Railroad's got work to start today." More riders appeared on the ridge, workers with torches and tools. Sophia's heart pounded as she watched 2 men approach their cabin, roughly shouldering past John to begin tossing their belongings onto the dirt. Their precious quilts, the family Bible, John's carpentry tools, all thrown without care. "Stop!" Sophia cried, rushing to gather what she could. "Please, these things are all we have." But the men ignored her pleas. She watched helplessly as they dragged out the table John had lovingly crafted. the chairs where they had shared their first meals together. Her eyes burned with angry tears as their life's work was scattered like chaff. Neighbors began gathering at the edge of the property, drawn by the commotion. Sophia searched their faces desperately, but most looked away, unwilling to challenge the railroad's authority. Even Mrs. Tillman, who had shown such kindness, could only watch with hands clasped in silent prayer. "Time's up," Tucker announced. He nodded to his men, who raised their torches. "No." Sophia lunged for the doorframe, clinging with all her strength as flames licked up the cabin's roof. The heat pressed against her face, but she refused to let go. "This is our home." John's gentle hands finally pulled her back as burning shingles began to fall. They stood together, watching helplessly as fire consumed their beloved cabin. The walls that had sheltered their first tentative love, the roof that had protected their dreams, all crumbling to ash in the merciless afternoon sun. John's shoulders sagged, his voice barely a whisper. "I have failed you, Sophia. I promised to provide a home, and now..." His words trailed off as he stared at the destruction. Sophia pulled him close, feeling his body shake with silent sobs. Around them, the deputies and railroad men went about their business with cold efficiency, marking boundaries and discussing plans as if they hadn't just destroyed two people's world. As dusk approached, Sophia salvaged what she could from the scattered belongings, some clothing, her battered cookware, a few quilts that had escaped the worst damage. The family Bible had survived, though its pages were smudged with dirt. She clutched these precious remnants close as they walked away from the smoking ruins of their home. They made camp by the river, where John had once taught her to fish. Sophia spread their salvaged blankets on the ground while John built a small fire. Their treasured cast iron skillet, a wedding gift from her sister, was all they had left for cooking. The night settled cold around them despite the summer air. Sophia huddled close to John, their shared warmth more precious than ever. Above them, stars wheeled in the vast Colorado sky, indifferent to their pain. The distant crackle of their still-burning cabin carried on the wind, a constant reminder of all they had lost. John stirred restlessly beside her. "I should have done more," he whispered into the darkness. "Should have fought harder, found those missing papers somehow." Sophia held him tighter, feeling his grief mirror her own. Their hard-won happiness, the community's gradual acceptance, the future they had planned together, all seemed to lie in ashes with their cabin. Yet beneath her pain, something else stirred, a fierce determination that refused to be extinguished. They lay together under the open sky, their few possessions gathered close, listening to the river's steady flow. Everything they had built together now lay in ruins, destroyed by men who valued profit over people's lives. But as Sophia drifted into uneasy sleep, her heart continued to pulse with a singular thought. This would not be the end of their story. The morning sun cast long shadows across the riverbank where Sophia and John huddled under their salvaged quilts. The smoke from their ruined cabin still hung in the valley like a shroud. John sat motionless, staring at nothing, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "God has turned his face from us," he whispered, his voice hollow. "All my prayers, all our work, for nothing." Sophia watched him, her heart aching at his despair. The strong, gentle man who had defended her at the train station now seemed crushed beneath the weight of their loss. But something fierce stirred in her chest, a refusal to let their dream die in ashes. "John Lapp," she said firmly, moving to kneel before him. "Look at me." He raised his eyes slowly, their usual warmth dimmed by grief. "Remember what you said when we first met? When I told you I was too big for you?" Sophia took his cold hands in hers. "You said, 'You're perfect,' and you meant it. I saw truth in your eyes that day." A flicker of memory softened his face. "I did mean it. I still do." "Then don't you dare surrender now," Sophia insisted. "God hasn't abandoned us. He's testing our faith, showing us a new path." John shook his head. "What path?" "They took everything. Not everything. Sophia reached for her carpetbag, miraculously saved from the fire. Her hands trembled slightly as she withdrew a worn envelope, yellowed with age and creased from years of careful folding. "What's that?" John asked, leaning forward. "My father's legacy," Sophia said softly. She pulled out the document inside, a deed from the Freedmen's Bureau, its official seal still clear despite the paper's age. When he was freed, he bought land through the government program. 200 acres in Colorado Territory, right here in this valley, adjacent to your homestead. John's eyes widened as he studied the document. This is legal claim to land? Your father's land?" "My land now," Sophia corrected gently. "Papa died before he could work it, but he made sure everything was proper and recorded. I've carried this deed since leaving Georgia, waiting for the right moment." Hope flickered across John's face, then doubt. "But the land office, they wouldn't even acknowledge my proper filing. These railroad men, they're corrupt. They'll find a way to dismiss this too." Sophia squared her shoulders. "Then we'll fight them, with truth and faith and law on our side. I won't let them steal our future, John." She stood, offering her hand. After a moment's hesitation, John took it, rising to stand beside her. Together, they gathered their few belongings into bundles they could carry. The walk to town was long and dusty. Their feet dragged with weariness, but Sophia's determination never wavered. She held John's hand as they passed their ruined cabin, where railroad men were already setting up camp. The sun was setting when they reached town. Most businesses had closed, but lamplight still glowed in the parsonage windows. Mrs. Tillman opened the door before they could knock, her thin face creased with concern. "We saw the smoke," she said softly, ushering them inside. "Reverend Tillman is already writing letters to the territorial authorities." The parsonage was small but warm, filled with the aroma of bean soup simmering on the stove. Mrs. Tillman insisted they sit at her kitchen table, serving them generous bowls with thick slices of bread. "You'll stay here tonight," she declared, brooking no argument. We've made up the spare room." After the meal, they gathered in the parlor for evening prayers. Reverend Tillman's voice was strong and sure as he asked for God's guidance and justice. Sophia felt strength flowing back into her spirit with each word. Later, as they prepared for bed, Sophia turned to John in the privacy of the spare room. "I feel called to speak out," she said quietly. "Not just about the land, but about what's right. Even if people mock me." John studied her face in the lamplight. "They will mock. They'll say worse things than they've already said. I don't care," Sophia replied, her voice firm. "God didn't bring us together just to see us broken. Tomorrow we fight." John reached for her hand, and this time his grip was strong. "Together," he agreed. "Whatever comes." They settled onto the narrow bed, still fully dressed, too weary for anything but sleep. Yet despite her exhaustion, Sophia felt a quiet certainty growing in her heart. The deed in her carpetbag wasn't just a piece of paper. It was hope made tangible, a chance to reclaim not just land, but dignity itself. Dawn painted the Colorado sky in gentle pinks and golds as Sophia and John left the parsonage. The land agency opened early, and they wanted to be first in line. Sophia clutched her father's deed close to her heart, each step bringing them closer to their moment of truth. The clerk's face soured the instant they entered. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink-stained fingers, the same one who had misplaced John's homestead papers weeks ago. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Sophia approaching his desk. "We have a legal claim to present," Sophia said, her voice wavering slightly but growing stronger with each word. She placed the Freedmen's Bureau deed carefully on the wooden counter. The clerk barely glanced at it. "These old papers?" He sneered, pushing the document back toward her with one finger as if it might soil his hands. "Expired. Worthless now." "That's not true," Sophia insisted, her heart pounding but her spine straight. This is a federally binding document. My father purchased this land legally through the Freedmen's Bureau program. Your father? The clerk's laugh was sharp and cruel. Well, he ain't here now, is he? And I say these papers ain't worth the ink they're printed with. John stepped forward, his quiet voice steady. Sir, we request you examine the document properly. I've seen enough. The clerk's face reddened. Now clear out before I call the soldiers to remove you. They're right outside, helping secure that railroad route through your former property. Sophia felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Her fingers pressed against the deed's official seal. This is my land, she declared, her voice rising. God's truth and the law stand behind these papers. The commotion drew others into the office, curious townspeople peering through windows, a few brave souls stepping inside. Among them came Mrs. Tillman, her slight frame somehow filling the doorway with authority. Mr. Harrison. Mrs. Tillman's voice cut through the tension like a blade. I believe you know these Freedmen's Bureau documents are federally binding. Their validity doesn't expire. The clerk shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Tillman, this really isn't your concern. Oh, but it is, she interrupted, moving to stand beside Sophia. As is the fact that my husband, the Reverend, is corresponding with the territorial authorities about certain irregularities in recent land transactions. Her gentle smile didn't waver. I'm sure you wouldn't want to add another concerning incident to his report. A heavy silence fell. The clerk's eyes darted between the deed, Mrs. Tillman's steady gaze, and the growing crowd of witnesses. Finally, he reached for his ledger book, movements stiff with reluctance. Very well, he muttered. I'll file the claim. But don't expect any special treatment. Sophia's hands trembled as she watched him make the entry, recording her ownership of 200 acres in the valley. When he finished, she carefully folded the deed and returned it to her carpetbag. Outside, morning sunlight warmed their faces as they descended the agency's wooden steps. Neighbors who had witnessed the confrontation gathered in small clusters, their whispers carrying tones of surprise and admiration. Sophia heard fragments, stood her ground. Legal claim all along. Maybe the railroad men weren't right. John took her arm, supporting her as the tension slowly left her body. Now that the moment had passed, she felt drained, but oddly peaceful. They had won this battle with truth rather than force. That evening, back in the Tillmans' spare room, exhaustion finally overtook them. Sophia sat on the bed's edge, still processing the day's events, while John knelt for his evening prayers. This time, his voice carried clearly through the quiet room. Lord, he began, hands clasped tight, I thank you for my wife's courage today. Her strength shamas my weakness. His voice caught slightly. Please grant me the power to stand worthy beside her, to defend our home and future as she does. Help me learn from her faith and determination. Sophia felt tears spring fresh to her eyes, but these were different from the angry ones she had held back at the land office. These were tears of gratitude and love, watching this quiet man acknowledge her strength before God. Amen, she whispered, reaching for his hand. They lay down fully clothed again, too weary to do more than hold each other close. The spare room was small, but it felt like a sanctuary. Through the window, stars brightened the Colorado night, and somewhere out in the darkness lay their land, not just John's homestead now, but Sophia's inherited acres as well. Their future waited there, ready to be built together. 3 days after their victory at the land office, the railroad men returned. Their horses kicked up dust as they approached the burned remains of John and Sophia's cabin. This time, 6 men rode up, led by a thick-necked foreman in a black hat. Sophia stood her ground on the charred porch, the deed clutched firmly in her hands. John moved to stand beside her, his thin frame casting a long shadow in the morning light. This here's railroad land, the foreman announced, not bothering to dismount. Your little paper trick at the office won't change that. The law says different, Sophia replied, her voice carrying across the yard. We have legal claim to this land and the acres adjoining it." The men shifted in their saddles, exchanging glances. One reached toward his gun belt, but stopped when a wagon rattled up the road. Mrs. Tillman sat in the back while her husband drove, and behind them came 3 more wagons filled with townspeople. The foreman's face darkened. "This ain't your business, folks." "Oh, but it is," Reverend Tillman said, climbing down. He held up a sheet of paper covered in signatures. "We've got here a petition signed by 58 citizens opposing the railroads, unlawful seizure of homestead lands." More wagons appeared on the horizon. Farmers with weather-worn faces, women in dusty skirts, children clinging to their mothers' hands. They came in 1s and 2s, then dozens. The widow Johnson, whose barn Sophia had helped raise, brought bread and stew. Old Mr. Peters, who had once turned away from Sophia in the store, now nodded respectfully as he passed. The foreman glared at the growing crowd. "You're all making a mistake backing these." "These what?" Mrs. Tillman interrupted sharply. "These God-fearing neighbors who've worked honest land and helped build our community." The railroad men found themselves surrounded by stern faces. These weren't just farmers and townspeople anymore. They were a united front, standing firm against bullying and greed. That Sunday, the little church was packed to overflowing. Reverend Tillman stood tall in his pulpit, his voice ringing with conviction as he opened his Bible to Psalm 37. "The wicked plot against the righteous and gnash their teeth at them." He read, "But the Lord laughs at the wicked, for he knows their day is coming." His eyes swept the congregation. "We've witnessed true faith in our midst, friends. We've seen it in Sister Sophia's steadfast heart, in Brother John's quiet dignity. While others sought to destroy, they stood firm in their trust in the Lord." Sophia felt tears well up as heads turned toward her and John. She saw acceptance in those faces now, even respect. The same people who had once whispered behind their hands now smiled openly. As evening approached, wagons began arriving at their homestead again. This time, they came bearing tools and lumber. Men rolled up their sleeves while women spread picnic blankets. Children darted between the adults, carrying nails and smaller tools. "We're rebuilding," announced Mr. Peters gruffly. "Can't have good neighbors sleeping rough." The charred ruins of their cabin slowly came alive with activity. Hammer blows rang out as men cleared debris and began laying new foundations. Women organized supplies and planned meals for the workers. Even the sheriff rode out to oversee things, making it clear where the law now stood. As dusk settled over the valley, lanterns were lit. Their warm glow turned the worksite into a gathering of friendly spirits. Someone started singing a hymn, and others joined in, the melody rising sweet and clear into the darkening sky. Sophia sat on a fresh-cut log, carefully stitching the first square of what would become their new quilt. The fabric, salvaged from their burned home, still carried the faint scent of smoke. Each stitch felt like a prayer, a promise of renewal. John settled beside her, his hand finding hers in the lantern light. "The Lord is making beauty from ashes," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She leaned against his shoulder, watching their neighbors work. Mrs. Tillman organized a group of women planning tomorrow's meals. The widow Johnson taught young girls to sort nails by size. Even gruff Mr. Peters smiled as he showed boys how to properly sand lumber. "He's given us more than we lost," Sophia replied softly. "He's given us a true home." The square of smoke-stained fabric in her lap would be the center of their quilt, a reminder not of destruction, but of how God could transform loss into blessing. Around them, their neighbors continued working by lantern light, their shadows dancing like angels against the darkened valley. Golden leaves drifted on the autumn breeze as wagons rolled up to the Lapp homestead. The morning sun cast long shadows across the valley, where frost still sparkled on browning grass. Neighbors arrived in steady streams, their wagons loaded with fresh-cut lumber, food baskets, and carefully folded quilts. "Put those boards over here." Mr. Peters directed a group of men, pointing to the growing pile of timber. The new cabin's foundation already stood firm, its corners square and true. Children darted between the workers, small hands eagerly gathering nails from leather pouches. Sophia stood at her cooking fire, stirring a massive iron pot of rabbit stew. Steam rose in the crisp air, carrying the rich scent of herbs and root vegetables. Women gathered around her, kneading bread dough on portable tables and sharing recipes in friendly chatter. "Your stew reminds me of my mama's," said the widow Johnson, sniffing appreciatively. "Though I reckon yours might be even better." John worked alongside the men, his quiet strength earning nods of respect. He'd learned to accept help gracefully, understanding now that neighbors helping neighbors was God's way of showing love. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air, punctuated by laughter and calling voices. Near noon, a rider approached from town. People tensed until they recognized young Tommy from the telegraph office, waving a yellow paper. "Railroad's pulling out," he shouted, his voice cracking with excitement. "The main office in Denver says they're abandoning the claim. Won't fight the whole town." A cheer went up from the workers. John stood frozen, sawdust coating his plain black vest, until the news sank in. Then, in front of everyone, he strode to where Sophia stirred her stew. His eyes shone with tears as he took her face in his calloused hands and kissed her full on the lips. "I love you," he declared, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet yard. "God brought me the perfect wife, and I aim to spend my life proving worthy of you." Sophia's eyes glistened as scattered applause turned to wholehearted cheering. Mrs. Tillman wiped her eyes with her apron, while even gruff Mr. Peters cleared his throat suspiciously. By evening, the new cabin stood complete, its fresh-cut walls glowing amber in the setting sun. Inside, coal oil lamps cast warm light on smooth plank floors and sturdy furnishings donated by neighbors. The crown jewel hung on the main wall, a magnificent quilt, its patches telling their story in fabric. "That's from my Sunday dress," Mrs. Tillman pointed out, touching a square of blue calico. Other women stepped forward, identifying their contributions: feed sackcloth, dress remnants, even precious bits of wedding gowns. Nearly every household in the valley had contributed something to the patchwork masterpiece. Sophia stood in the center of their new home, feeling the love stitched into every seam of the quilt. John took her hand, and together they bowed their heads as neighbors gathered close. "Dear Lord," John prayed, his voice steady and sure, "thank you for new beginnings. Thank you for showing us that your love builds stronger walls than hate can tear down. And thank you, most of all, for bringing us home." "Amen," the gathered voices responded, and Sophia felt it in her heart. She was truly home at last. Soft white flakes drifted through the morning air as townspeople hurried into the little white church. Inside, warmth from the pot-bellied stove wrapped around them like a blessing. The wooden pews creaked as the congregation settled, all eyes drawn to the front where John Lapp stood beside Sophia, his plain black coat dusted with melting snow. Preacher Tillman nodded encouragingly, and John cleared his throat. His voice trembled at first, then grew stronger as he spoke. "When Sophia stepped off that train last winter, I saw God's hand at work," he said, fingers twisting his hat brim. "But I was afraid I wasn't strong enough, afraid I couldn't protect her." He glanced at Sophia, love shining in his eyes. "When she thought she was too big for me, she didn't know the size of my heart. The Lord made her perfect for me." Tears streamed down Sophia's cheeks as murmurs of agreement rippled through the church. Mrs. Tillman dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief as the congregation rose, their applause thundering against the rafters. After the service, John and Sophia walked home through the deepening snow. They shared their quilt like a shawl, their breath-making clouds in the winter air. The valley stretched white before them, pure as promise. Inside their cabin, the hearth crackled welcome. Sophia broke warm bread, still steaming from its baking. They bowed their heads together, John's prayer soft but certain. "Thank you," Lord, for showing us your perfect plan, he whispered. Thank you for giving me a wife whose strength makes me stronger, whose love makes me braver. Sophia squeezed his hand as peace settled over them like the snow outside. Through their window, the valley glowed pristine white, a canvas for their redeemed future. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.